What's up, clean freaks? It's Hank Balch in studio today with Kurt.audette. You've seen him, hopefully, by now. We're all the way to episode 4 in this Rigid Scope Expert series here in 2024. But if not, hey, there's good news. We got another 3 episodes already out there in the wild, and we got a bunch of episodes here to come. And today, we're going to be talking to Kurt about the pre-cleaning challenge or opportunity or the necessity and the impact that it has on these precious little scopes. So, Kurt, welcome back to the show today.
Pleasure to be here again, Hank. I'm loving it so far. I just want to preface this conversation by saying there is so much information. You and I could sit down for weeks and talk about this. So what I want to make absolutely clear is you can definitely reach out and ask me questions through email or LinkedIn, whatever social media outlet works for you, because I know we're not going to hit it all. But if there's any specific questions, let me know. Yeah, so let's just talk about pre-cleaning. So when we talk about, rigid endoscopes, they can be used in a variety of different settings. They can be used in clinics. They can be used and when I say used, we're talking about the entire reprocessing cycle now. So imagine I'm in a clinical space and then I'm in some small little closet somewhere trying to decontaminate a product and, high level disinfect it if we want to, which we'll talk about later on. But then it's okay. So if we're in those spaces, are we pre-treating it? If we are, what are we pre-treating it with? If we're in the OR, same conversations. I don't have a sink in the OR, but I do have some pre-cleansed gel or some type of enzymatic pre-treatment that I get questions about, and I'm sure you got questions about as well in your career. So in general, when we talk about pre-cleaning, at the highest level, the first thing I want to keep in mind is number one goal is we just want to remove as much of the gross bioburden, microbial life, whatever term you want to use today. And the way to do that is some OEMs recommend water. Some recommend enzymatic chemistries, and I know you've got a lot of experts on that subject, so I'm not going to go crazy with that. Um, but for me, if I'm talking about an enzymatic chemistry from a manufacturing perspective, a couple of questions I'd ask myself are, what type of enzymatic am I selecting? Is it a neutral pH? That's number one for me. Number two, and it seems to be generating a lot more interest, is there allergic reaction to my staff with different enzymatics? And then it's the requirements about sudsing and can I clean, can I see, and cost is always, the biggest factor. And there was a time in my career where I had a database of enzymatic detergents that were utilized by folks, and that got up to about 80 different, and I stopped. And they were chosen for all the reasons I've already given you: neutral pH, allergic reactions, effectiveness, obviously number one, and then availability. So again, our goal with pre-treatment is to make sure that we remove as much of the gross debris as soon as possible. So one of the biggest questions we get, I had one today, is how quickly, how long can I let it sit? Different manufacturers have different statements. I'm not going to go into the granular details of that, but think about you're washing dishes at home and you just had dinner and you had some pasta sauce. Um,
You and the pasta, what is it with
I'm
you and the
making
pasta?
myself hungry today. I just
I mean, these illumination fibers of pasta, we got pasta for the pre-clean. Something's going on here.
yeah, love pasta. But anywho, if say I have pasta and I don't clean the dishes immediately, what's going to happen? I mean, we've heard this analogy used before. Um, if we don't treat it as soon as possible, then it becomes that much more difficult to remove. And what typically happens is these things attach themselves and then they move on down the line through different chemistries. And if we're not cleaning it, rinsing it properly, drying it properly, getting it ready for that next process, which is high level disinfectant, sterilization, now it's a contributing factor to damage. And there are times when we see that telescopes, the illumination fibers aren't cleaned really well, and you have this yellow image on the screen. And it's because now you have that collection of something at the distal tip where the light, because the light is transmitting through glass, heat's going to occur when resistance occurs. So now if I have something in front of that light path, in this case, biofilm, bioburden, it's going to generate heat, which then bakes, for lack of a better word, that debris onto those illumination fibers, and we get a yellowish image on the screen. Again, after pre-treatment, then we talk about how these things are stored. You know, how are we going to get them to the next phase? And there are so many different containers, trays, and things that we can utilize. Again, I encourage you to work with your vendors to determine what's best for the endoscope that you have. Obviously, meeting the requirements that you have with JACO in your region of the country.
Right. And that graphic here with the case card is an example of how not to transport it, I'm assuming. Right? That's not a
Yes.
best practice photo.
Yeah, but it's the easiest way to get our spray gel on it. You know, but then just make sure you get the cover back on there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, your comment though about the pre-treatment, the point of use here is well taken, especially the implications, right? It's the distal tip, that's likely to be the area that has the most contamination to begin with, but that's clearly the area that if we're using any kind of chemical or anything that's supposed to be kind of like a wetting agent or, get that process started, that's where we want to apply, and that's where we want that chemical to stay until that manual cleaning step occurs.
Correct. And there, like I said, I just threw a visual up on the wall. There are so many different types of chemistries. These are just some of the examples that I've observed over the years, and I'm sure, Hank, you have your list. And, there's a lot of these first steps. I think they're great. A Ziploc bag with the sponge, the ends of whatever chemistry you choose, makes it that much easier. We're talking about rigid endoscopes that are non-lumened. Now you factor in telescopes or semi-rigid scopes that actually have lumens, and that becomes a different conversation of how we aspirate or how we push fluid through the lumen during that pre-treatment phase. That's super important when you have scopes that have a lumen as well.
On the care and handling piece, obviously on the next episode that we're going to talk about, we're going to kind of dive into manual cleaning. But for this care and handling pre-treatment transport phase, the teams that get this right the most often, what do you see? Like, is there any kind of consistent theme? And when you go in a hospital and you do education, you see, I bet you this team is going to be applying this well. They're already like, maybe it's best practice. Is there anything that we should be looking as clinicians at our teams and saying, we may need to start doing this if we're seeing some gaps in the process that you're describing?
You've heard this before. It's standardized. I can't say it enough. In facilities that I visit across the country, you can immediately walk into a department just like you could someone's home. And probably a horrible analogy with somebody's home, but you could look at them and say, wow, they're neat and organized. They know where things are. They know what needs to happen, and they can be efficient. Just like automotive mechanics that have shadow boxes or places where they're and I work on my cars, so I've got all my tools, make it quick as possible. So standardization is one. Once it's standardized, then you can then insert people into a process. And once you establish the process, then it's repeatable. So to answer your question, getting those scopes as quickly as possible, get them treated with whichever chemistry you choose. Next, get them into some type of storage container that has been reviewed by your local vendor and determine, is this going to be safe for handling, for storage? And once you do that, you can repeat that process and you should have a reasonable outcome or a good outcome with your product durability.
Well, speaking of process, this is the beginning of the process, but it's not the end. As I alluded to, we're going to come back on our next episode with Kurt and dive into the decontamination stage, this manual cleaning stage where a lot of the magic happens. It doesn't start there, like we said, starts at the bedside, starts right post-op, but a lot of the activity is leading up to this moment that now we're getting all the debris off. We're getting to that clean state so we can move on throughout the rest of the process. And so hang with us here on this series. Make sure to like and subscribe to these channels that you're watching this video on right now if you're not already. And if you have questions or comments for Kurt that he hadn't already covered yet in this series, we're going to have his contact information in the write-up of the show notes. You can email him. You can get connected with him through LinkedIn. That's why he's here, to help get these kind of concepts deeper out into the industry and to equip you to fight dirty better. Speaking of fighting dirty, we're going to close it there and remind you, like we do each and every week here at Beyond Clean, to keep fighting dirty.